"My dad says we can't buy flowers from you," the boy whispered, his voice too loud in the quiet air of the nursery. "Because you don't have anyone at home." Anna froze, a trowel full of dark soil suspended mid-air. The word nobody hit harder than the midday sun. She looked up at the boy, Leo, maybe 7 years old, standing next to his father's dusty truck. His father, Arthur, a quiet man who owned the hardware store, was already walking away, clearly mortified by the child's unfiltered observation. Anna tightened her grip on the wooden handle until her knuckles were white, the simple transaction violently ruptured. The boy, oblivious to the wound he'd just inflicted, only tilted his head, waiting for a reaction to the impossible rule he'd just delivered. The silence smelled of wet peat and profound isolation. Anna wiped the sweat and dirt from her brow with the back of a canvas glove. The humidity in the greenhouse was stifling, a heavy blanket that pressed down on everything, matching the weight settling in her chest. She watched Arthur quickly usher Leo into the truck cab, the embarrassment radiating from the father even through the glass. They drove off, leaving the small parking lot empty except for Anna's old faded blue sedan. The rejection wasn't new, only the bluntness of the delivery. The nursery. The Green Root was Anna's sanctuary and her prison. It occupied a deep, slightly sunken lot on the edge of town, surrounded by tall, unkempt cedar hedges that provided privacy but also isolation. It was a place designed to keep the world out. She turned back to the rows of hydrangeas, their large, heavy blooms drooping slightly under the heat. The silence that followed the boy's departure was absolute, broken only by the drip-drip of an irrigation line. She moved slowly, automatically pinching off dead leaves, her movements precise and necessary. She wore faded jeans and a thick cotton shirt, clothes chosen for utility, not comfort. Everything about Anna was pared down, efficient and slightly dusty. Inside the small office shed, the floorboards creaked under her weight. The desk was meticulously organized, ledger, receipt book, calculator, all aligned perfectly. On the far corner sat a single small ceramic elephant, chipped at the ear. It was the only non-functional item in the entire room. She ran her thumb over the rough edge of the chip without looking, a habit she'd never broken. That elephant had been the only thing her father hadn't sold off when he decided the responsibility of caring for a child was less profitable than chasing a phantom opportunity in the next state over. He hadn't bothered to say goodbye, just left the elephant and a note asking her to water the dying houseplant. She had been 10. Now, decades later, the solitude was her armor. She ate dinner at the desk, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and listened to the sound of the wind moving through the tall pines. She lived in the small apartment above the shed, the only lights visible from the road belonging to her. She cultivated plants that required careful tending, but offered no conversation, no expectation, and certainly no judgment about who she did or did not go home to. She was self-contained, a closed ecosystem, fiercely protecting the small green world she had built over the years from the chaotic and hurtful human world outside. That was why the boy's simple words had managed to pierce the silence. They confirmed the deep, unshakable truth she already knew. She was separate. The next afternoon, the squeak of old truck brakes announced the return of the hardware store owner. Arthur pulled up, but this time he parked closer to the fence, giving his truck a quick, nervous wash with a hose he'd brought from his own store. Beside him, Leo stood still, clutching a plastic spade that looked far too small for him. Arthur didn't approach the greenhouse immediately. He was a man defined by heavy lifting and quiet responsibility. His shoulders were perpetually slumped, not from weakness, but from years of carrying the weight of his small business and, more recently, being a solo parent. He looked genuinely tired, the kind of exhaustion that seeped into the bones. He wore a plain grey t-shirt stretched taut across his frame, and there was a smear of grease on his cheek he hadn't noticed. Finally, he approached Anna, who was struggling to move a pallet of heavy terracotta pots. "Anna," he started, his voice rough. "About yesterday, Leo doesn't filter, he just repeats what he overhears." Anna straightened, her expression flat. "It's a nursery, Arthur, not a family counseling service. Did you need anything?" He didn't apologize again, knowing it would only magnify the awkwardness. Instead, he did something practical. He stepped forward, placed his hands beneath the pallet, and effortlessly lifted the weight Anna had been straining against. "Where does this need to go?" "Behind the shed," she managed, watching him carry the load as if it were kindling. It was a simple act of assistance, devoid of pity or grand gesture. It was just one adult helping another move something heavy. While Arthur was away, Leo carefully picked up a fallen bird's nest made of dry grass and mud. He held it in his cupped hands, examining the fragile structure. "It's empty," Anna said, thinking he might ask if the birds were coming back. Leo shook his head slowly, his eyes wide with observation. "No, it's full of holes. It won't hold the eggs anymore." He didn't sound sad, just stating a fact of broken construction. Then he gently placed the nest under the cover of a large fern, as if giving it a quiet, dignified burial. His sincerity was painful. He saw the world in terms of structure and safety, and when those failed, he recognized the failure instantly. Arthur returned, wiping his hands on his jeans. He nodded to Anna, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes for her lack of drama, and retrieved Leo. "We'll be back for those perennials tomorrow," he said, already retreating toward the truck. He paid for the soil he'd originally come for and left quickly, leaving behind only the lingering scent of motor oil and sawdust. "Tell me, de qual cidade você está assistindo esta história? Comente abaixo." The next day brought rain, a slow, persistent drizzle that turned the gravel lot into mud. Anna found herself waiting, perhaps unnecessarily, for Arthur's return. When his truck finally reappeared, it wasn't for plants. Arthur parked but didn't immediately get out. He was alone. He stepped out of the cab holding a battered, leaking plastic watering can. "I'm sorry," he said, gesturing to the item. "This thing finally gave out. Needed a replacement quick, but the hardware store only stocks the industrial size. Leo hates those. He likes the little plastic ones that spray." He had come to the nursery, of all places, for a mundane piece of equipment he could have easily found online. He knew Anna sold small garden tools for children. Anna nodded toward the supply shelf inside the shed. "We have them, blue or green." He followed her into the small, dry space. The air inside smelled of earthworms and cool cement. He stood awkwardly while she located the watering cans. "Leo spent 20 minutes yesterday trying to tape his old one back together," Arthur confessed, leaning against the doorframe. "He takes his job seriously. We're working on his garden bed, mostly weeds, but he insists on calling it the Wild Zone." Anna managed a small, almost invisible smile. "Sounds accurate for a 7-year-old. She rang him up. The total was insignificant. Arthur pulled out his wallet but hesitated, looking past her at the single, dusty window. "We're trying to build a shelf for his tools this weekend," Arthur admitted, the words spilling out as if he needed to fill the silence. "He wants to hammer the nails himself. Trouble is, I can assemble a 4-story building, but I can't seem to keep a simple shelf square." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "My wife, Amelia, she was the one who could make everything look intentional." The mention of Amelia was heavy, a ghost present in the small room. Anna recognized the tone, the deep, constant ache of a missing co-pilot. She didn't offer comfort or platitudes. She offered something far more useful. "You're using the wrong anchor for the drywall," Anna stated, pulling a small, heavy L-bracket from a random shelf. "And your level is probably cheap. Bring the shelf here Saturday. I'll make sure it's square. I built this shed from the foundation up." Arthur looked at the small woman, the proprietor of the Green Silence, and then at the sturdy walls around them. He saw not a lonely hermit, but a competent builder. "You would do that?" he asked, surprised by the unsolicited help. "It's just wood and nails, Arthur," she said, her voice dry. "I charge extra for motivational speeches." He let out a short, surprised laugh. It was the first time she had heard him truly relax, and the sound softened the hard edges of the shed. A very small, unintentional breach had occurred in the fortress of her solitude. Saturday arrived, bright and surprisingly cool. Anna had cleared a workspace in the gravel lot, laying out a tarp and her heavy-duty tools. Arthur arrived with Leo and an astonishingly crooked wooden shelf resting precariously in the truck bed. Leo, gripping his new blue watering can, immediately began spraying the weeds in his imaginary wild zone while Arthur unloaded the shelf. Anna, kneeling on the tarp, examined the wood structure. It wasn't the material that was wrong, it was the assembly. Each corner slightly askew, glued and nailed without alignment. "You need to pre-drill the pilot holes," Anna instructed, picking up her heavy impact driver. She worked efficiently, disassembling the shelf with practiced ease. Her hands, usually covered in soil, moved with the confidence of someone who built things to last. While Arthur fetched a missing bolt, Anna picked up a small wooden bird carved crudely from pine. It was fastened to the shelf with a single bent nail. Leo must have made it. Anna remembered a similar object. She was 12, and her father had been gone for 2 years, having dumped her on a distant, disinterested aunt, who viewed Anna as a temporary inconvenience. Anna had tried desperately to build something for her aunt's yard, a miniature fence made of twigs and twine, hoping to prove her usefulness to secure her place. The fence fell apart in the first strong wind. Her aunt had simply swept the broken twigs into the trash, saying, "If you can't build it right, don't build it at all, Anna. Don't waste the time." That single sentence had cemented Anna's adult philosophy: efficiency over sentiment, and never relying on fragile structures, physical or emotional. It was safer to be the foundation than the decoration. She held the wooden bird now, noticing the uneven cuts and the loving but imprecise craftsmanship. Leo had signed his initials on the base in faint pencil. The bird was imperfect, yes, but it was theirs. It represented a belief in the ability to construct a stable world, even if the result was shaky. Arthur returned, seeing the shelf in pieces and Anna holding the wooden bird. He didn't ask what she was thinking. "That little guy insisted on building a perch for his new watering can," Arthur explained softly. "He's worried the water will run out if it stands on the ground." Anna simply hammered the bent nails straight against a concrete block, then expertly secured the wooden bird to the rebuilt shelf using a proper small screw. She handed the heavy shelf back to Arthur. "It's square now," she said, "and the bird won't fall off." The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It felt like shared work. The square shelf installation marked a shift, not dramatic, but definite. Arthur started appearing at the nursery every Tuesday and Friday afternoon, always bringing Leo, sometimes under the guise of needing specialty potting mix, other times just to borrow a specific tool Anna owned that his store didn't carry. The routine was quiet. Arthur would talk about the logistics of running a hardware store, the price of lumber, the complexity of inventory, and Anna would listen while pruning roses. He never asked about her life, and she never offered details. Their interactions were transactional and functional, yet completely rooted in presence. Leo, meanwhile, had annexed a corner of the nursery, christening it the watering hole. He would spend hours with his blue watering can, tending to a patch of forgotten sedum Anna had planned to throw out. He never demanded attention, but he was always close enough to hear the low murmur of their conversation. Anna began keeping a small thermos of black coffee ready on Tuesdays, knowing Arthur would be arriving just as her energy flagged. Arthur, in turn, learned the complex lighting needs of her most delicate ferns and would casually adjust the ventilation in the greenhouse if the sun shifted too drastically. They became unofficial, unpaid co-workers in the margins of their lives. One day, Arthur found Anna struggling to wrestle a huge root-bound olive tree into a new planter. She was sweaty and frustrated, covered in soil. He didn't ask if she needed help. He simply took the tree's heavy trunk, coordinated the lift with a low grunt, and settled the olive tree perfectly into its new home. "You need better leverage," he said, wiping a smudge of dirt from his own hand. "Always use the natural momentum." Leo, watching from his watering hole, offered a piece of granola bar, holding it out with intense seriousness. Anna rarely ate processed food, but she took the offered snack, the gesture entirely genuine. "It's good fuel for structural integrity," Leo declared, quoting his father's favorite phrase for construction work. Anna chewed slowly, looking from the boy's earnest face to Arthur's exhausted but present profile. It was such a small circle of interaction: work, food, silent understanding, yet it held a surprising amount of gravitational pull. She hadn't realized how much she had been bracing against the constant expectation of the world, until she found two people who simply existed beside her, without demanding an explanation for her existence. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like armor. It felt like space. The disruption came on a surprisingly warm Thursday in late spring. Arthur had brought Leo to drop off some specialty tools he'd borrowed, a short 15-minute trip, before heading back to the demands of his busy store. Anna was dealing with a stressful delivery of rare tropical seeds that had arrived damaged and rotten. Her temper, usually locked down tight, was frayed. She was tallying the loss on the ledger in the shed, frustrated by the financial hit. Leo, meanwhile, decided to move his operation from the watering hole to the immediate vicinity of the shed. He was experimenting with creating a dam using loose stones and a trickling overflow from a rain barrel. He was fully absorbed, humming softly. Anna needed to cross the small office to grab a shipping label, but Leo's dam construction was precisely in her path. She sidestepped the stones, but in doing so, her heel caught the edge of a clay pot full of delicate young herbs. The pot tipped, shattering the clay and scattering the vulnerable seedlings across the damp earth. Leo froze, his humming stopping abruptly. Anna let out a sharp, involuntary sound of distress, not about the breakage itself, but the immediate expensive loss of the rare plant stock. "Leo, move your work somewhere else," Anna snapped, the stress overwhelming her usual control. Her voice was louder and harsher than she intended, the words sounding like an accusation. Leo's lower lip trembled. He hadn't been careless. He had simply been present in the wrong spot. He looked down at the mess, his eyes welling up not with fear of punishment, but with the sudden, crushing understanding that he had ruined something important. Arthur rushed in from outside, drawn by the sound of the crash. He saw the broken pot, the scattered plants, and Anna standing rigid with tension. He also saw the look on Leo's face, that familiar, devastating disappointment of having inadvertently failed. "It was an accident, Anna," Arthur said, his voice flat, immediately stepping between his son and the aftermath. "Leo, go wait in the truck." Leo didn't argue. He picked up his watering can, now feeling heavy and useless, and walked silently away. Anna felt the sudden, sickening plunge of regret for her sharpness, but the words were already out, the damage done. The memory of her aunt's cold rejection flashed in her mind. If you can't build it right, don't build it at all. She had just applied that brutal rule to a child. "It doesn't matter if it was an accident," Anna said, her voice tight, defending her immediate reaction with cold logic. "It's about respecting the workspace." Arthur looked at her, not with anger but with profound disappointment. "It's about a small mistake, Anna. He's 7. We clean it up. We move on. That's how we teach them to stay attached to things, even when they're broken." The implicit criticism hung between them. Anna hadn't learned how to clean up and move on. She had only learned how to discard what was broken. The fragile structure of their routine, the unspoken safety, shattered faster than the clay pot. "I'll clean it," Anna stated stiffly, pulling on thick gloves. "You should go." Arthur hesitated, wanting to fix it, but knowing he couldn't touch her defense mechanism. He simply nodded, the exhaustion deepening on his face. He left without another word, the sound of the truck tires grinding on the gravel echoing the abrupt closure of their recent proximity. Anna stood over the mess, the shattered clay a symbol of the connection she had just destroyed. The silence of the following week was crushing. Anna tried to bury herself in work, potting, watering and rearranging, but the nursery felt too large, the air too still. She kept catching sight of the small patch of sedum, now neglected, the watering hole entirely dry. She knew Arthur wouldn't return immediately. He was a decent man, and decent men prioritize their children's sense of safety. She had breached that safety. Her immediate thought was to send him a bill for the ruined seedlings, to keep the interaction purely business, purely safe. But the idea felt like the ultimate self-sabotage, a final, definitive push away. 2 days later, Arthur's hardware store suffered a setback. A major shipment of roofing materials, crucial for several construction projects in town, was incorrectly routed. The delivery was now stuck 300 miles away, creating an immediate catastrophic delay for Arthur's contracts. The news spread quickly through the small community. The pressure on Arthur was immense. Anna heard the details from a passing customer. The loss wasn't just financial, it was reputational. Arthur, usually reliable, was facing a wave of panicked calls and angry contractors. Anna didn't hesitate. She didn't call him. She didn't announce her intentions. She simply closed the green route. Early, something she almost never did, and drove her old sedan to the distribution center near the freeway exchange. She spent the entire evening securing a third-party driver, paying a significant, non-refundable deposit out of her small emergency savings, money she had earmarked for repairing her greenhouse roof. She knew Arthur needed the material before 6 a.m. the next morning to meet the contractors on site, and commercial freight companies moved too slowly. By 2 a.m. she was driving her own sedan, towing a borrowed industrial-grade flatbed trailer. It was meant for hauling large trees, but it could handle the roofing pallets if stacked carefully. The logistics were grueling, the drive lonely, and the fear of the heavy load shifting in the dark kept her entirely focused. She wasn't thinking of apology or redemption. She was thinking of structural integrity, the need to stabilize Arthur's foundations when they were failing. She was protecting the man who protected Leo. She pulled the trailer into the back lot of Arthur's hardware store just as the sun began to warm the horizon. The materials were heavy but manageable with her small forklift. She unloaded the pallets precisely where Arthur usually stored them, checking the invoice and realizing she was still owed money for the job. She wrote a quick anonymous note on the back of the freight manifest. Checked against shipment X49. Delivery complete. A. She tucked the note under the invoice and drove away, back toward the cool, silent safety of her nursery, disappearing before Arthur's store lights came on. The weight in her chest had been replaced by a deep physical exhaustion, but the quiet satisfaction of having fixed something essential, without being asked and without requiring recognition, was a powerful unfamiliar currency. It was a full week before the truck reappeared at the green route. Arthur parked slowly, turning off the engine with a sigh that seemed to deflate the air. He walked toward the shed alone, his expression unreadable. Anna was wiping down the counter, her movements precise. She didn't look up immediately. Arthur stopped a few feet away. He didn't thank her for the delivery. The anonymous note had been too specific for any other conclusion. He knew it was her. The job went through, he said simply, his voice low. No loss. Minimal delay. Anna nodded, still focused on the counter, polishing a clean surface. Good. I know it was you, Anna, he continued. That trailer belongs to the Johnson farm. They said only one person had the capacity to tow that load on such short notice. Anna shrugged, concentrating on a stubborn streak of dirt. I owed them a favor, and I had a free night. He watched her for a long moment, allowing the silence to stretch. He saw the defensive rigidity in her shoulders, the way she was prepared to deflect any gratitude or conversation. You risked a lot, Arthur finally said. That trailer alone is $10,000. You didn't even ask for the gas money. It was a logistical problem, Anna countered, keeping her tone flat. I solved it. He didn't press the subject of the delivery further. He understood that acknowledging the sacrifice would require her to acknowledge the connection, and she wasn't ready for that. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, carefully wrapped object. Leo wanted to bring this back, Arthur said, placing the item gently on the counter. It was the chipped ceramic elephant. Anna realized it must have been in his truck since the day she'd snapped at Leo. He must have picked it up when she was distracted cleaning the shattered pot. He asked me to tell you that he fixed the ear, Arthur added. Anna looked down. Leo hadn't simply glued the chip back on. He had taken a tiny piece of wood, sanded it smooth, and secured it to the elephant's ear with a small brass nail, a piece of structural repair mirroring the work they had done on his shelf. It wasn't perfect. The wood patch stood out brightly against the dark ceramic, but it was solid. It was stable. The sound of small feet crunching on the gravel announced Leo's arrival. He had been waiting by the truck. He walked straight up to Anna, not with defiance, but with clear honesty. The elephant needs to stay here, Leo stated, looking her directly in the eye. It's lonely at my house. It needs to watch the plants grow. Anna finally stopped wiping the counter. She looked at the small boy, who saw structural loneliness in inanimate objects, and the single father who understood the difference between a logistical problem and a heart problem. She reached out slowly, touching the rough, uneven repair Leo had made on the elephant's ear. It can stay, Anna whispered, the words barely audible. "Thank you, Leo." He beamed, the cloud of the past week dissolving instantly. Arthur watched the exchange, a silent truce achieved not through dramatic apology, but through the small, tangible action of structural repair. He didn't ask her to come back to their routine. He simply stood there, present. Weeks later, the rhythm had not just resumed, it had deepened. The nursery remained Anna's professional sanctuary, but the apartment above the shed no longer felt like a solitary fortress. It was late Friday afternoon. Arthur and Leo had stayed past closing time, working on a new outdoor project, building a proper compost bin, a complex task that required Arthur's large-scale construction knowledge and Anna's deep understanding of organic decay. Leo, appointed the quality control manager, supervised from the porch steps, occasionally offering strict instructions about the angle of the hinges. The setting sun filtered through the greenhouse glass, casting long, warm shadows across the dusty lot. Anna emerged from the office holding 3 bottles of cold soda, a luxury she usually denied herself. She handed one to Arthur and one to Leo. Arthur wiped the sweat from his brow with his forearm, his shirt dusted with sawdust. He looked genuinely content, the heavy lines of responsibility around his eyes softened by the shared effort. "The bin will last 40 years, Arthur predicted, taking a long drink. "Maybe 60, if Leo doesn't decide to move it." Leo grinned, accepting the compliment to his ambition. Anna sat down on the top step, the rough wood familiar beneath her. She noticed that the ceramic elephant now sat prominently on her desk, always catching the last light of the day. Arthur packed up the last of his tools. He paused, watching Anna observe the small boy who had so bluntly pointed out her aloneness months ago. "We need a good name for the compost bin," Arthur mused. Leo looked up, considering. "It should be called the New Dirt Place," he decided immediately, "because it takes broken things and makes them new and strong." The phrase hung in the twilight air. Broken things becoming new and strong. It was a description of the compost, but also of the last few months of their lives. Arthur walked over and sat next to Anna, not too close, but close enough to share the quiet moment. He didn't ask her to come over for dinner, nor did he offer any grand commitments. He simply spoke about the next day's plans, detailing a need for structural reinforcement at the hardware store. "If you have a couple of hours tomorrow," he said, looking at the ground, "I could really use another set of hands that understands tension brackets." It wasn't a date. It was a partnership. It was an invitation to exist together in the functional, reliable space they had built. A space where she was valued not for what she lacked, but for what she was. Competent, essential, and grounded. Hannah looked out at the tall cedar hedges that surrounded her nursery. Hedges that once felt like the walls of her own self-imposed confinement. Now they felt like the protective border of a shared space. She took a slow breath of the cooling air, the scent of fresh-cut pine mixing with wet soil. "I'll be there," she confirmed. Arthur smiled, a tired, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He gathered Leo, who quickly finished his soda. As they pulled away, the truck tires crunching on the gravel, Leo rolled down the window. "See you later, Anna," he shouted, waving his blue watering can. "Don't let the elephant get lonely." Anna raised her hand in a small wave, watching them go. She wasn't rejected for living alone. She had been chosen for building a home. The family they were building wasn't connected by blood or document, but by the shared, quiet choice to protect one another's foundations. Se você foi tocado por esta história de pertencimento e gentileza silenciosa, deixe seu like, inscreva-se no canal para mais narrativas cinematográficas e comente a parte que mais te emocionou.